Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Hive Jive, and I am joined again by Miss Natalie. How are you doing today?
Howdy, howdy. I'm doing fine. I'm happy to be back and look forward to this episode with excitement because I've got one of my favorite guests on board. So,
Oh, spoiler alert. So, if you guys remember last episode, Natalie and Gemma were talking about insulating hives, and Natalie brought up Hive Hugger, which caused me to kind of like stop in my tracks and say, wait, what? Who? Huh? What is this thing we are talking about? And so I went in and did a little bit of research. And then I thought, you know what? What better way to answer any questions than to go directly to the source? So joining us today is the co founder of Hive Hugger, Miss Peggy DeSanto. Welcome to the show, Peggy.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here. Appreciate it.
We are happy to have you. Natalie was all kinds of giddy with excitement when I said, you know
I'm
what?
so excited.
Let's just have Peggy come and talk to us next week.
We have history, so it's good history. So I feel the same way. Very honored and excited to be here.
Oh, well, that's good. That's good. Well, I'm glad it's good history too. Then I don't have to sell boxing tickets like I did a couple of weeks ago.
That was not boxing tickets. I was also excited about that
I'm just not,
episode.
it's such an easy thing to pick on you about because it was hysterical. It was very riveting. It was
Uh,
great. But it does make for a good, like sell tickets and popcorn kind of moment. Um,
Good backs and forth and
the
an
back and forth.
interesting conversation. I really, really enjoyed it. I think we both did. So, yeah.
It definitely was. This is completely off topic, but just for your own benefit, Natalie, you'll love this. So we did have several listeners comment on that.
Oh,
And one
really?
of them was
Ooh,
like, man, now I really wish she would have been there for the other interview.
I listened to it and I would have loved to be there as well, but
Yeah, that was my thought. That was me. I told you whenever that came up, I was like, I just sat back and I was like, oh God, I'm so glad she's in Italy.
I love the outro, the just when you say goodbye and it's always the same type of things we say and be good beekeepers, I think it was.
Yeah, be good
Be a good
beekeepers.
beekeeper.
Don't be a bad beekeeper, be a good
Yeah.
beekeeper.
I'm
Okay.
like, what do you mean?
Anyhow, that is neither here nor there. So the star of the moment is you, Peggy. So let's start in, when did you get started in beekeeping, or what gave you the urge to get started in this whole crazy thing we're all addicted to?
Mhm.
I have been gardening since I was 8 years old. I dug up my parents' front yard and they were not gardeners and were not really into nature. And they're like, what is this young kid doing? And so I really have been obsessed with growing food, which lends to being comfortable digging in the dirt, being comfortable with bugs, had a bug collection, and pretty much have been a gardener, was a master gardener my whole life. And my sister and a girlfriend were driving down a country road one day, and we drove by some beehives, and my friend said, I can see you being a beekeeper. And I swear something just clicked in my nervous system that went, yep. I mean, I'm like supposed to be one. I don't know if you believe in destiny, but it just felt like crystal clear. And so I immediately started action stepping. And this was probably about, 10 or 15 years ago. And that I started beekeeping around, 2012. So yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Did you do the traditional follow everybody's advice and start off with two? Did you have one, or did you do like our other co-host Ken, where I told him we're just gonna do three and he ordered 15? Like,
no, I just started with two. The most I ever had was four. So really stayed at the hobbyist level. I mean, it's a lot of work. And so I just was working full time as a nurse and still had massive, huge gardens that I was tending to. So I really had to kind of just keep it within a reasonable like size for my apiary. I didn't want to like not like it because I've overextended myself gardening and it became a burden. And so like, okay, I don't want to have this be a burden. So just keep balanced.
I think that's
Yeah,
actually very wise, because
yes.
it's very easy to get addicted and then all of a sudden find yourself in over your head because the excitement. And then suddenly you're like, wait, I've got all these colonies I got to look at. I didn't have time to get to these. That needs help. It can definitely get overwhelming. And for me, I went from having a whole lot to, when I relocated, there was quite a while where I didn't have any. And
Mhm.
so I've built myself back up. Currently, we've got 6 colonies, and I am Oh well, technically 5 colonies because I dismantled one and used it to populate the high school's colony back where it should have been. So, but I'm perfectly fine with having 10 or less. Like I'm good in that range. I don't need to have a lot anymore.
I don't know how
Yeah.
people could. It really, I have the utmost respect for people who can manage that high number of hives. It's just, yeah, it's incredible because there's a lot to it.
Are you hiding over there, Natalie? Are you like
Yeah, I'm hiding my head, looking ashamed over here because I'm a hoarder of beehives, of bee colonies, and I just can't stop. Like
There's going to be a TV show called Hoarders, specifically.
bee hoarders.
hive hoarders or bee hoarders? Yeah.
I know a lot of people I could nominate for that show. That's all good.
Yeah, no, I try to be mindful of the load on the ecosystem and not overload each of the they've got them spread in like many yards, right? So but it's always a concern, and I try to kind of make up for that by encouraging people to plant. So to your point, do the gardening and do the planting for the pollinators and help them all out that way, right? So
Yeah, and you actually, so we have on record on tape Natalie admitting that maybe reducing some things might not be a horrific idea if she wants to have time to
right,
focus on other things.
for anything.
Yeah, it can absolutely get overwhelming. So, 2 to 4, that's great. That's actually what anybody out there should strive for. If you can do the two, awesome. If you want to have an extra one or two just to be able to experiment and whatever, that's fine. But there's not honestly a need to go much beyond that. And that is kind of one thing people need to be aware of when it gets down to density and overpopulating an area. So Peggy, for yours, have you always been in that Langstroth traditional square box world?
I have.
Yeah. And that leads other challenges. And one of those is those boxes are not very thick and therefore don't do well with thermal dynamics. And I'm assuming, based on where you ended up later in life, you experienced your own struggles with this challenge.
I did. Yes. So, a little bit more about my background. As I mentioned, I am a registered nurse, and I worked in, chemotherapy, the intensive care unit, emergency room. And as a result of working in those really high acuity settings, I witnessed a lot of death and a lot of people sort of like fighting for their life. Like I've given chemotherapy to children. I was on the Code Blue team doing CPR on people. And as a result of sort of working in this profession and being so close to death, I have a very high sensitivity to the sacredness of life. Like it imprinted on me. And then fast forward, new beekeeper in Minnesota, opening my hives in the spring and finding half of the colonies had died. And I am hardwired to save lives, and all life is precious to me. And I literally like started crying. I felt sick, and it was almost intolerable. And so subsequent years as a beekeeper, I tried all different winterization techniques and had similar poor outcomes, 50 to 60% colony loss. And I realized, that's the average. And I was absolutely shocked. Like, I don't remember anybody telling me that when I started this hobby. And I felt a little bit trapped or a little bit stuck, like, sorry, it's just the way it is. It's the statistics. But instead of giving up, something again inside me said, do some research, figure it out. There's got to be a better way. Like we can do better by our bees. And so I went on a bit of a deep dive, and a dear friend of mine said, you need to figure out what science says. Like, what does the literature say? What does the data say? Is there studies that say this is how you should winterize? So I was pleased and actually sort of surprised to find out that there are a lot of research studies on optimal overwintering techniques. They're current, they're consistent, they're pretty high tech. And so I pretty much just built a system based on what research says we should do. And curiously, it's not what I had been doing, and it's not what a lot of beekeepers are doing. And it's based on the condensing hive system, which we can get into. And so it was like a completely different paradigm. And so, but I trusted the data, I trusted the research, and built a system based on the condensing hive approach. And great outcomes.
I
I
want
mean,
to
the
know
data. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I apologize. I thought you were done. I want to know more about that condensing hive system when the time comes, when you're ready to discuss that.
Well, I mean, do you have any other questions, or should I just launch into that, or?
No, we can totally go into the condensing hive, because the listeners, if they don't understand the concept, that'll absolutely go through and help them out. And then we can build off of that into kind of what you ultimately came up with for the idea and the design, and how that all plays together.
Yeah. Well, the most heated debate in the world of winterization is what kills bees? Is it the cold or is it the moisture? And if you take a poll, my guess is you'll get a 50-50 split on which one is responsible for killing bees in the winter. But the data says, well, it's actually both, right? It's both. And you need to solve for both. And so the approach most people do to solve for moisture is they put holes in their hive boxes because they need to ventilate out the moisture. I don't know if you've ever been like in a car in the winter and you got a bunch of people like talking, and also the condensation collects on the windows, right? And you can't see outside anymore. How do you handle condensing, wet windows? You crack the window, you turn on the vent, you bring in fresh, cold air. And so what happens is the moist, warm air leaves and it's replaced by cool, dry air. So everybody knows the solution to condensation, excessive moisture, is to ventilate. But what happens when you're in that car in the winter? It starts to get cold, like, because you've got this vent on and the windows are cracked. No different in a beehive, right? So, like in an automobile, it's fine if you're cold, you just turn on the heat. We've got a gas-powered engine, but in a beehive, right, the bees are the engine. They are the gas. They're the ones that generate this heat. And so now we have beekeepers in the middle of the winter, drilling holes in the boxes to let out the moisture, but also there goes the heat. And so ventilating, it solves for moisture, but I will also talk about there's actually a lot of scientific proven reasons to keep moisture in the hive. So it solves for moisture, but it actually creates a worse cold problem. The bees are colder than they would be if you weren't poking holes in the box. But that's kind of the best we've got, right? So that's the ventilating hive, a very common approach to overwintering. Compared to the condensing hive, the research says we don't want to get rid of the moisture. Varroa reproduction is slowed down in high humidity levels. The bees need water to drink and to metabolize their honey. And they just, a high moisture environment is just sort of more healthy for the bees. So how do we keep the moisture in the hive without moisture killing the bees? Because we know moisture kills the bees, but it kills the bees when it's on the ceiling of the hive and drips down on our bees. Wet bees are dead bees. High moisture in the hive does not mean dead bees. Wet bees are dead bees. So the key, and again, this isn't my research, the key to the condensing hive is control where the moisture condenses. And how do you do that? So I did a YouTube video, and the key to how you solve for moisture is dew point. And a beekeeper said, Peggy, you had me at dew point when they listened to my video, because that's it. And so dew point, and I apologize if this is basic science for a lot of you, but when we are sitting here like metabolizing our food, a byproduct of metabolism is water vapor. We are all exhaling water vapor. No different in a beehive. a byproduct of bees metabolizing honey is also water vapor. That's how the water vapor is getting in the hive. So what happens, whether it's in your living room or in a beehive, when that water vapor that's in the air hits a surface cold enough to be at the dew point, that water vapor turns into liquid water, right? That's really important to understand. That's what dew point. Dew point is the temperature where liquid water, is created. So if the key is to keep the bees dry, you want to just make sure that the top of the hive stays above dew point, right? So if it stays above dew point, condensation won't happen there. And so how do you keep it above dew point? Super insulate it. Ensure that this surface never hits dew point. You also insulate the walls because you want to keep the bees warm, but you purposely insulate the walls less, like maybe a third of what you insulated the roof, so that the moisture, when it condenses in the hive, because it will condense in the hive, because we want it to condense in the hive, it will condense on the cooler walls. Etienne Tardif calls those his condensing walls. And thus the condensing hive, because the condensing hive promotes, encourages, wants condensation, and it controls where the condensation happens. So now you have warm, moist, toasty, dry bees. And the data shows much better outcomes. When bees are not cold, they consume significantly less honey because, again, this is a lot of Etienne's research. And I'm sorry, I could go on and on. Should I just keep going?
Sure,
Oh,
go
this is
for it.
fascinating. Please do.
Okay. So at around 55 degrees, the bees start to cluster, and then they start vibrating their wing muscles to generate heat, right? It's a cold response. It's an adaptation to cold. But what happens is, and the data shows this, the data literally looked at how much energy is generated when bees are at rest versus when they're shivering. And the graph just spikes up super sharp when they start hitting around 55 to 60 degrees, when they start going into that shivering response. So they are using so much more energy to shiver. And not only are they using a lot of energy, to get energy, they need to consume a lot of honey. So they're consuming more honey, and Etienne Tardif talks about this thing called metabolic stress leads to metabolic death. Not only are they consuming more honey, they're literally working themselves to death. The data also shows cold bees don't live as long as warm bees. So ventilated hives, the bees will die sooner. More, if the hive survives, it's going to come through with fewer bees because you burnt out a good portion of your population. So the other big factor that a lot of people don't think about is your colony can starve to death by consuming all that honey, or if the bees are so cold at 14 degrees, that cluster reaches maximum tightness where it can't even move anymore. And so a lot of beekeepers will ask, like, oh, my bees died in this cluster an inch away from honey. And they're like, oh, they starved to death. And it's like, no, they froze to death because that cluster was so tight, it couldn't even move an inch to get to their honey. They froze to death. So common misconceptions of what's contributing to this winter hive loss. And a third very common reason bees die in the winter happens actually in late winter, early spring, when the queen starts laying eggs. This is the most vulnerable time for hive loss of the whole year. And it's so super confusing for beekeepers because they're like, oh, they made it through the winter at minus 20, and now in March, they up and died on me, and why? And what happens is when the queen starts laying eggs, these old tired worker bees, and if they're in a cold hive all winter, they're super tired, now have to activate their glands to care for these baby bees, and then heat the brood nest to
into the mid 90s.
In the mid 90s, right? That's a big ask because they have to uncluster to care for the baby bees. So they can't even cluster. And now they've got to work that hard to bring the hive to that temperature. And if you've got a cold snap, say it's the 40s or even 30s for a prolonged period of time, and they can't maintain that 90, say 5 degrees, they'll simply quit trying. All the brood will die. And there's no replacement bees to replace these old winter bees. And if your brood dies, the whole colony is going to perish. And it happens again and again. And so people are like, oh, you know, they're confused. But the reason your bees died is they got too cold. They just got too cold. So another reason to provide thermal support, right? And not be ventilating or under insulating your hive. So it's no wonder that the colony survival and early brooding and, you know, bees coming through stronger and decreased honey consumption is scientifically proven again and again. It just makes sense. Of course, warm bees are going to have those outcomes. So there you go.
That's amazing. And so to be clear, that means when you are insulating properly, extra on the top and some on the outside, you don't need and don't want that ventilation. Is that correct? Especially cross ventilation.
Yes, it's called the stacking or the chimney effect.
Yeah.
What happens, the lower entrance, of course, you keep a lower entrance open, you know, brings in cold air, and the cold air pushes up and out the warm, moist air and out the upper entrance. And so you've got this vicious cycle of, you know, heat loss. And so, no, I mean, Randy Oliver says, you know, would you ever in a 2-story house in winter open your upper windows? Right? Like, why would you do that? You would never do that because it's just going to blow the hot air right out your top floor. I mean, it's just common sense. And when people hear about this, they're like, oh my God, it's just common sense. I mean, why didn't we sort of think of it? And I'm like, well, a lot of people did think about it.
Yes.
Research, it's all over the research, and it's catching on, you know, and more people are winterizing this way. And I am not at all taking credit for anything about saying that I came up with the condensing hive approach. I just read the literature and built a product based on what the science says we should do. That's it.
That's beautiful. I have a question, if I may. We're talking about winter. Does this also apply in a way to the summer? I was having a discussion about insulating hives in the summer would cook your bees, and I disagreed because the bees will better ventilate something that's tighter, that they've been. To me, it made more sense that the airflow controls and everything would be more efficient, and also that the lowering of the temperature compared to the outside would be easier to keep inside an insulated box. But maybe I'm wrong. So I wanted to know what your take was on that.
Yeah, that's a really common question people ask. There are research studies, one in Egypt and one in Western Canada for sure that I know about, that absolutely said insulation helps to keep your bees cooler in hot weather climates. And people who have polyhives or apame hives, there's tons of, you know, just testimonials that the bees do better year round with insulated hives. I have tried testing the Hive Hugger product in hot weather climates. Actually, Randy Oliver did test them, but I mean, he got them on a little bit late in the summer, and some of the hives were in the shade, and it kind of was like it was inconclusive. So I can't really speak to that. But he's in sort of hot, but not humid. And so I did work with a beekeeper in Tennessee where it's hot and humid. And initially, and the numbers weren't small. We didn't have, you know, the enough to really call it good data. But initially, the Hive Hugger hives showed improvement in colony strength and productivity. He just said that they're just by far happier. But somewhere in the middle of summer, that benefit was lost. Like it sort of equalized, and then 2 of the Hive Hugger hives died. We had temperature humidity sensors in there. There was nothing on the data that sort of revealed why. Was it the Hive Hugger? Was it something else? I honestly don't know. But because of it, again, being inconclusive, I basically tell people we are not marketing or selling the product for hot weather use. I don't have the data to back it. There's other data, and maybe, you know, and I haven't talked about the specifics of the product. Our top panel's an R32. The research study I know in Canada, all they did is an R10 on the top and nothing on the sidewalls. You know, and so, and this guy in Tennessee did an R32 on top and an R8 on the sidewalls. Was it too much? And again, I talked to Randy about it, like, why wasn't there a difference? Why was there initially benefit and then it was lost? And he wasn't even really super sure either. And because on paper, it doesn't make sense. They should have done better. So the answer is, I hope to do more research to be able to say, yeah, it does make a difference. But to be honest and have clarity about the product, we are not marketing and selling it for hot weather use.
How many colonies would it take?
What's
Oh,
that?
okay.
Oh, until we get data. I don't want to
Okay.
sell a product unless there's data proving that it's effective.
Oh,
And we have a
yeah.
lot of data for winter use. And honestly, we're sort of busy enough trying to, like, you know, market and sell for winter use that's enough anyway right now. Yeah.
No, I was wondering how many colonies would it take to have a good data set, and which areas of the country would they need to be in at which season, so that maybe we can put out a call out to our listeners to, if they know somebody that can help out with that. If you want to keep investigating that, if you're right now focusing on just the winterization, then
Yeah.
it's probably moot. But yeah.
Yeah. It would be nice to have 12 research and 12 control.
Oh,
So total
okay.
for hives would be nice, just to, yeah, have bigger numbers.
That's not a
Would
horrible
Texas?
that's not a
No,
horrible ask, because
it's not.
you know, before she says anything, I happen to know somebody who keeps between 300 and 400 on average, and it gets stupid hot, and it's getting more and more humid every day. They might be able to help out.
Yeah. So that's wonderful. Thank you. I don't think about these resources where you guys have access to, like, so many beekeepers who have potential interest in helping out. That's wonderful. Because I did get a SARE grant to study it for winter use. And so I do have instrumentation and, you know, broodminder to use for other studies. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a really good question. Thank you for asking that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you know, with 12 and 12, maybe I can justify more hoarding of beehives on my end. I have the
You don't need to get more hives to be able to
hive.
dedicate 12 of
Or
them to
more
the
work. Is
research.
that what you're saying?
No, John, they're research hives. She doesn't have dedicated research hives. That's part of her collection, right? I get you, girl.
I
No, but
don't think Nathalie needs anybody to enable her when it comes to this
come
stuff.
on, just entertain me
Our
some more.
codependent relationship. It's for the good of science. It's for the good of
It's for
bees.
science. It's for humanity. It's for the bees. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
for the bees.
It's working its way towards an intervention is what it's doing. That's how
Yeah.
we used to start off some of the Travis County meetings. You know, like, hi, welcome to Beekeepers Anonymous. My name is John. I have a problem.
Who gets the intervention tonight?
Right.
That's great.
Let's all share our stories.
That's right. So I
Well,
was
so
thinking
no, go ahead, Nathalie.
just one little, I was thinking you were mentioning the two that died. Could there have been some possibility that colony had pests or pathogens or mites, virus load, and the population went down, being unable to actually bring the temperature and humidity levels to the right level for them and the volume inside the cavity?
You know, the beekeeper, he was the sideliner. He had a couple hundred hives, and he said it's a busy operation. He said, I don't think it was mites, but I don't know. I honestly, you know, there's just too much going on to really do a really clear sort of diagnostic. And so I don't know, right? I
Right.
mean, could have been.
I guess what I'm alluding to is that I don't think it contradicts necessarily your data points from in the research from anything else. I'm saying there might have been other factors,
Yeah,
including a lower population, whatever the cause was, that might have caused them to not be able to maintain a homeostasis. Who knows?
that's true.
Yeah,
And we can
absolutely.
theorize about that in a little bit on the Patreon episode.
Oh, yes, that's
We can dig
true.
real deep into that aspect.
Yeah.
Um, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody like what specifically is Hive Hugger? What makes it unique, and how do you actually utilize that to help with winter insulation?
Sure. Um, well, so Hive Hugger, as I mentioned, is a condensing hive winterization system. But what's sort of unique or special about it is it incorporates the most effective insulation panel ever created, like on the planet. And there's a little bit of a sweet, somewhat love story behind how that came to be incorporated in the product is when I was losing my bees every winter and trying to figure out a better winterization approach and doing the research, I started dating a man who owns a business in high-tech insulation.
That's convenient.
Again, is it is it convenient?
Serendipitous.
Right? Is it destiny? I mean, here I am, like almost a freak about the sacredness of life and love bugs and want to protect bugs. And then this man shows up in my life who says, well, I have access to, engineers and thermodynamics, and I've got access to like the most efficient insulation, available. And so it's called a vacuum insulation panel. But probably what will be more familiar to people, if you think of like the thermos technologies, remember thermoses? Do you ever wonder like how do they keep beverages hot for so long? Yeah. What is that technology? It's a
Vacuum.
it's a vacuum, right? And vacuums are excellent insulators because in a vacuum, there are no air molecules. And without air molecules, heat transfer, I mean, it can take place, but it's extremely slowed down. And some brilliant person said, well, it's wonderful that we can put, vacuums in like a canister, but what if we did an insulation panel that was a vacuum insulation panel? And so someone invented it. My partner told me about it. And so we use a vacuum insulation panel on the top of the hive to achieve that super, super, super high R value. Yeti puts vacuum insulation panels in their $800 coolers. I mean, they're heavy hitter insulation. So the technical R value of a vacuum insulation panel is 46, 10 times more efficient than foam board. Fiberglass is a 3.3, foam boards are between 4 and 5. This is 46 in an inch. Crazy, right? And I'll get into the like details about why so our panel isn't an inch, it's about 0.8 of an inch, which makes it an R32. But that was intentional because Tom Seeley's research study on natural bee cavities, the one that he did with Radcliffe in 2023, where they looked at if we were going to sort of make our Langstroth hives much closer to what a natural tree cavity provides for thermodynamic support, what would we have to do to our Langstroth hives? And he basically said you'd have to put an R32 on the ceiling and R10 on the walls, and then you'd have a tree. And that would be sort of ideal protection for your bees, at least in zone 5, where he is. Curiously, Etienne Tardif in the Yukon zone 1 insulates R30, 10 to 20 on the walls. So we're getting sort of like, okay, these are the ranges, R30, R10-ish, that are sort of optimal to keep bees warm in zones 1 through 5. And so our product, vacuum insulation panels at R32, the hive wrap we have 2 densities, R7 or 8. You add the hive box, which is about a 1. So we've got, 8, 9 wall support. So yeah, that's, and we call the vacuum insulation panel the crown, kind of to honor the queen bee, but also it's kind of the crown jewel of the product. It sets it apart from, and you can't get vacuum insulation panels at Home Depot. They're a very high specialty item. But I do want to take a little time here to say that I am not on this podcast, and I'm not even in the business of selling the system to like make money or sell product. I'm going to be 60 this year. I kind of like, what am I doing a startup at this point in my life? I really am here, I believe, to help create a paradigm shift. I'm here to provide education to beekeepers on what the data says is sort of an optimal way to overwinter. If you want to buy the Hive Hugger, that's great. It's easy, right? It's easy to get an R30 with this little panel instead of putting, 6 inches foam board stacked on top of your hive boxes. But because we don't sell overseas, I get emails from people in other countries who said, I saw your video and I created a condensing hive. Here's a photo of it. My bees did great. Thank you so much. That makes me happier than selling the product, right? Okay, so I think I'm supposed to sell the product to make it easy and as sort of a platform for the education. They go nicely together. But yeah, if everybody on the planet was creating a condensing hive by a DIY, I would be happy with that outcome.
Yeah, hear that, Australia? You got to DIY it yourself.
I did have a beekeeper reach out and say, I really want to buy one, but it was like over $100 to ship it to her. And so she's like, I got to think about it. But yeah, no, it's that's right. DIY it. And this is it's just I give a lot of bee talks, and I have beekeepers in their 80s who say, I know I've been overwintering my bees like this for 20 years. We know. I mean, people have known this, and so yeah, they've been DIYing it for a long, long time. But they also say when I try to share that with people, I get a little bit like, it's not a popular way to kind of winterize, and they catch a little bit of flack for that. So, and I catch that too when I give bee talks, because it's new, and it sometimes beekeeping's wonderful in that it's a hobby that's passed on by your mentor, but sometimes when tradition bumps up against science, how do you go, what do you do with that?
Well,
I trust data.
it's new and it's not new, because you referenced a couple of times from Tom Seeley's research and from what you were talking about, something that I say quite often, and that's the whole, what would the bees be doing if you weren't there to intervene? They're going to be in a tree. They've got 3 or 4 inches minimum around the circumference, plus whatever's going on above them. And you have to look at that and try to mimic some things from that, or infer things from what would they be doing? How is the tree insulating them? All this other stuff. And we know it, but then we turn around and we created this product. We, as the Universal Beekeeper, created this product that was geared more towards a commercial standpoint, the ease of management, the ease of removing things, and probably the ease of being able to build it. And as Nathalie and I and anybody else who has built one of the 2x thick top bars knows, lumber that's bigger than 3/4 of an inch is a beast to try and move. It gets heavy. It's not fun. It's not fun lifting a Langstroth when it's full of honey, let alone if it was much thicker wood, So insulating the hives is definitely something that needs to be done. And when you look at the logic of it, and you look at like what you were talking about, having that top vent, number one, you are letting all the heat out. You're pulling cool air in, you're forcing hot air out. You're also potentially encouraging the formation of the actual dew point up at the top as the air is flowing past it and it's cooler up there. So it all plays hand in hand, and it makes perfect sense, like you said, if you can let go of the tradition. If you can take a minute, listen to it, think about it logically, think about what would happen in nature, and then apply it, it doesn't sound so foreign. It doesn't sound like an alien concept. It sounds like, oh yeah, that makes total sense.
Yeah, and to go back to the Seeley study, specifically when they looked at natural tree cavity colonies, they did not have upper entrances. If there happened to be a natural one, the bees would propolize it up. They really preferred hive enclosures with just a lower entrance and sort of infinite insulation above, like many, many feet of wood. And so you're right. And Dr. Seeley's done amazing work in helping people look at, well, the bees have evolved over millions of years, and they've survived, and they probably know what they're doing. And so why aren't we doing what the bees are doing?
Well, exactly. And there's a little bit of a forgotten wisdom around us as well, because Langstroth didn't design his hives that way either. It had a layer of insulation all around that was meant to do exactly just that. And we, in our commercial endeavors, decided to just make the hives lighter, cheaper, and for go, how do you say that? Forwent the whole insulation of the glass, around it. So I think
Forego,
some of
we forego it, it became a foregone
before
byproduct of,
God,
yeah.
this is where my English stops working.
Translation from French to English. Yay.
Okay. We got it for sure. And thank you for bringing that up. That's right. Yeah, that wasn't the original design. Yeah,
That's
we can't blame him.
right.
So Peggy, you came up with this concept. You serendipitously, managed to meet up with this gentleman who just happened to have the resources and access and knowledge to bring this together. So as Nathalie said, very kismet, kind of meant to be aspect of it.
Serendipitous.
Yeah, serendipitous. You went through, you put all this together, you created this product. You did end up getting that grant from the University of Minnesota for the SARE grant, so you could do the research, but you also got that award, the innovation award from ABF. So what was that like? Like, first off, I'm sure you were probably just astounded and ecstatic that to be able to be the recipient and a winner of something like that, because that garners a lot of attention for innovation in beekeeping.
Yeah, you're right. It did. So I want to give credit really to the University of Minnesota. When I first started, literally like, oh, you need to research what is the science saying on how to overwinter. I'm from Minnesota, right? I mean, Dr. Marla Spivak, U of M Bee Lab. So that was my very first phone call is, can you guide me on where to go with this? And they're the ones who said, research Bill Heschbeck. Bill Heschbeck is kind of the godfather of condensing hives, I think, and don't quote me, I think he's the one who coined them, condensing hives. But I asked him, so he's become a dear friend and a mentor of mine. He's tested out my product every year. I'm sending it right. But the U of M said, look into Bill Heschbeck's data. And so they got me going in this direction right out of the gate. Then once the first prototype was developed and I got some, really preliminary data, I went back to the Bee Lab and said, this is what I've come up with. And Dr. Marla Spivak sitting right next to me. And she said, yeah. She said, Peggy, get the data. And honestly, they are the ones who told me about the SARE grant. They wrote me a letter of recommendation, and then I got it and provided a lot of support around getting the data. And they're the ones who told me about the ABF award. And they said, you need to apply for this. And so because, I can't thank them enough for having my back and helping me get the data. Even though it was based on data, it was important to get our own data.
Yeah, to show what it did with the product itself. Yeah.
And it mimics what the research says. I mean, it's no surprise. So yeah, so that's the story with the SARE grant and the ABF award.
Well, and that speaks volumes itself, just because you have such large name people in the beekeeping world and community who are pushing you to do this, who are saying you need to apply, you need to get this, you need, like, that shows right there that they think that you're onto something and they're willing to help guide you in the right direction, give you the boost that you need to get there. So that speaks volumes in and of itself as well.
Yeah, and it's an under maybe studied, no, I mean, so I'm going to be a little bold, like Etienne Tardif and some of these other really high level, brilliant beekeepers have been teaching condensing hives for a long time. But I honestly feel like they're so smart and they give so much data that I don't know that people walk away saying, I think I need to do a condensing hive. Because they're and I swear I brought it to a level like everyday people can understand the science that these brilliant people have done. I condensed it down into a relatable format. So this YouTube I did for a beekeeping club, I happened to record it and then I posted it so they had access to it to the people who couldn't make it. And it sort of went viral. It like 12,000 views in 3 months.
Oh, nice.
And beekeepers, and there's two versions about it. The two versions are at over 20,000 views because beekeepers just went, what? And then just share. And so I believe it's delivered in a way that people get it. And again, I feel like I'm making it sort of sound like beekeepers aren't super intelligent, but they are. But these researchers are just like, genius IQ. Like it took me, I watched Etienne's and read these studies again and again and again and again for me to kind of like, oh, I think I got it. And then, yes, took the time to sort of summarize it in a more relatable fashion. So I apologize if I'm offending anybody, but I feel like that's why I made the information more accessible. I think it was out there, but just not as accessible.
I'm personally very grateful for that. You've basically did the entire beekeeping community a huge service by making that not only your product but also the research accessible, when most people will have their eyes glaze over when they start reading studies, right? So there's value there. There's huge value, and for that I'm very grateful that you were able to patiently pour through those studies and do the data analysis and all that stuff. So we are all owing to you. I know we all owe you basically,
Yeah,
collectively. The bees do. I'm sure that's going to leave a mark, I
it's in
think.
debt. We're all in debt to
We're all
you.
in debt. Thank you.
Yeah. And
I
that's, I
think,
mean, it does actually speak volumes. Anybody who's been around somebody who talks very high level scientific jargon, people can get lost in that. And if somebody can digest that and then regurgitate it in common layman's terms, it does make it way more accessible to everybody out there. People that would have immediately just tuned out and been like, it's over my head. I don't understand. They can then go through and listen to it and get it. So yeah, that is a huge help to the beekeeping community.
oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. That was helpful. And the beekeepers have said it again and again, like, thank you for bringing it to our attention. And it's making a dent, it's making a difference. The product's working and there's a lot of gratitude. And I feel like, yeah, this is, I was a piece, I'm part of the puzzle, but I've had so much support, so much help. Like I said, Etienne, he personally Zoom calls with me, and Randy Oliver, and just, before I gave my big bee talk, first one, Randy's like, I'm going to quiz you. Okay. Is moisture lighter or heavier than drier? Like he says, because you need to be able to answer these questions. And if you don't know your stuff, then you're not going to look very smart. And so people have really gone the distance to help me make this all.
Yes.
Yes, and it's so much bigger than me. And so I just want to thank them and thank all the researchers, and everybody like who's, yeah, the U of M. I've had a ton of help out there.
So everybody that's doing the research, those crazy smart people, those are very important. But I think that there's just as much importance and value in having a translator of kinds, right? Having the connecting joint, because otherwise none of that matters to most of us, right?
I'll let your compliment sink in and quit there. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate it. I appreciate it.
no
So
problem.
I've got additional questions on condensing and other aspects and dew point and some different variations, but I'm going to save those for Patreon. We'll talk about those over there for anybody who wants to join in and hear more about that conversation with us. You can do that on Patreon and follow along. But for this specifically, going back to the product itself, you talked about the crown. That's the one that actually has the vacuum sealed, the void of all the air out there. Then there's the wrap. So you technically have two different products that can be bought individually or in conjunction. You've got them set up to where you can do the 10 frame or the 8 frame on the Hive styles. But what I didn't see there, everything I saw was all Langstroth. Is there a world where there could possibly be a top bar version of this or some other Hive style version of the Hive Hugger?
Yes. So, how did we meet? Did you reach out to me, Natalia? Like,
I did. I think Tony mentioned, my friend Tony was talking to you, and he's like, "You need to talk to Peggy," and so that's who put us in contact. And then I reached out, I think, yes, at that point.
so one of the sideliners bought 60 of our kits and had, good benefit, and he also is connected to the Amish here in the Midwest, and the Amish help make some of your top bar hives, and so that's the connection. And so yes, she reached out and asked if Hive Hugger could potentially make a custom wrap and crown panel configuration to support the top bar hive. And we did a prototype, sent her a video, and it's not in production, but it can be, right? And we're happy to look at potentially having them mass produced, or at this, depending on if there's an interest, we can certainly do some custom orders this fall or this winter. But what's really beautiful, and again, serendipity, that the crown top panel fits perfectly and beautifully over both the lands and the topper hive. It just does. You set two of them side by side, and it's pretty much all you need to do. You might need to tie that tape around the seams. And then, yeah, it's not that hard to just, and you could do it yourself, just cut foam board. And we use like a long screw with those little circular washers, secure them onto the hive box sides and bottom. And then we use sort of foam insulation cut to the same configuration of the following board. And so you've got the side insulation within the hive besides the side insulation on the hive box itself. Mm-hmm. And we have, there's quite a few top bar lands, hives, beekeepers who well, the Lands hive has the wool inside it, but they're just using the crown, and they've had good overwintering success. Like, they compare it to not using the crown with the crown. And the other thing with Lands is it's kind of a ventilated hive system. And so they're having to like plug their ventilation holes that are in the top cover and then put the crown panel on. And so they're making condensing hives out of these, horizontal hive configurations. So yes, it's being used in those areas. And then Apame users also have reached out saying the bees are propolizing up the vents, like they don't want ventilation in the winter. And we would like to instead put your crown panel on top of the Apame hive and then create a condensing hive. It's already got the built-in insulation on the sides. And I don't know, there's maybe a dozen beekeepers who somewhat sort of jerry-rigged the top crown panel to fit into the Apame, and have extremely like game changer results. And they're doing their own studies. And so, yes. And so one of the Apame beekeepers asked if I could have the vacuum insulation panel custom cut to actually fit inside the top cover of the Apame instead of sort of jerry rigging it. And so we ordered 25 of those. And so they're going to be out in the field just to see how effective they are in that, the built-in into the cover. So that's a hopefully to be developed product later. Or if the owner of Apame wants to talk, maybe we can work with them to have it built in a little cleaner than, I don't know, but it's in process. So yes,
options.
I mean, why not? Why not use the condensing hive in this, crown panel and the other hive configuration styles, or the poly hives? I mean, I love that there's insulated hives out there. But if the polyhive designer, wants to talk and put a crown panel with the polyhives, make condensing hives out of polyhives, yeah, I think it would be wonderful. Yeah.
Either way, I'd like to see if you and I can talk about me ordering some of the top bar versions of these as a custom order if you are doing this, so that, I don't know what's the minimum units, but we can talk about that offline. And I just would really like to try to put them in practice, especially because we're looking a lot at cold weather, but I want to also test them on the hot weather, right? So yeah, definitely.
AKA my person I know that runs 300 to 400 colonies where it's hot and getting
I
more
know
humid
someone
every day.
that has a lot of hives.
A rumor has it, and then they're interested in research. And the nice thing about the horizontal hive or the top bar hive is once you put the insulation on with that, circular washer, you just leave it on year round. Versus a Langstroth, you kind of have to take it on, put it off. But that way, you just the crown panels, and you could leave those on too. So absolutely, I would love to sort of explore what it would take to have some of those on hand for people to try out, for sure.
Yes, that's awesome. I'm so excited. And I really, by the way, thank you so much for working with me on the prototype and just even entertaining the idea. I really appreciate that.
Well, it was easy. I mean, I know you were like, oh, this is amazing, but it was quite quite easy. You just cut foam board to fit, and then, whatever. So yeah, but you're
Makes
welcome.
it sound easy.
Well, we're
Um,
gonna transition here into some of the more beekeeping hardball questions here that I warned you about. So you have been a beekeeper yourself for quite a while. You've been going through, you've experienced, the ups and downs as we all have throughout the years. How do you currently feel, Peggy, about the current state of beekeeping? Do you feel like we need more beekeepers out there? We still need new beekeepers getting into the game? Do you feel like it's getting a little crowded and overpopulated? Like where do you feel from your standpoint?
So you cut out a little bit. So I'm going to just restate what I heard you say in case the listeners didn't hear the question. So the first question is like, how do I feel about sort of the current state of beekeeping? And my response is optimistic, because the public has now perceived beekeepers as superheroes, right?
Mhm.
That beneath our bee suits are like capes and leotards, because honeybees pollinate 40% of our food. And so we are keepers of honeybees, which are literally essential for humanity to kind of be okay. And because of that, public knowing that, there's been it appears, a really big enthusiastic response. Someone said, like, out of crisis borns invention, that people are like, holy, this is a crisis. How can we help? How can we support? How can we, do better by our bees? And the things that help our bees ultimately help us, right? They're kind of the canary in the coal mine. And so that's why I'm hopeful. That's why I'm optimistic, is because we matter, bees matter. And so the current state of beekeeping, it's great because people get it. Why these little critters are vital. And your second question is, do we need more beekeepers? Do we need new beekeepers, or is it flooded? And my sense is, because I have networked with a lot of beekeepers over the years being in this business, what happens when you become a beekeeper is you fall in love with your bees. You just do. And then when you fall in love with your bees, you sort of like, now you sort of love flowers, and now you kind of love habitat, and now you love ecosystems, and now you are conscious about, sustainability, and now you care about the earth and future generations. And so it appears that beekeeping creates conscious humans who care. And so do we need more beekeepers? Yeah, I feel like if all of humanity spent a short time in their life being a beekeeper, the world would be a better place, because it just stimulates consciousness and caring and sustainability and concern, that we're all in it together. The bees teach us we're all in it together. And so, yeah, the more beekeepers, the better.
I can't I can't argue with that, but I can't help but draw an analogy about the whole we can combat stupid people one beehive at a time.
Literally, John.
That's right. If they don't get it, we'll just throw the hive at
We
them.
throw beehives at them.
No, that was very eloquent. That was very well spoken, and I like I said, I cannot disagree with that when you put it into that context and terminology. That it does open people's eyes. It does make them more mindful of everything around them, and that is a good thing. That is definitely something the world needs, probably more now than ever. It feels like. So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, historically, the Egyptians, a lot of cultures saw bees as kind of the wise god level, sort of like these critters are otherworldly, like they have some access to some special mojo that we need to sort of honor. And so maybe it is, maybe it's their high vibration or whatever, the sound or the smell, but something about honeybees feels linked to like making us the best we can be.
Mhm.
And I might be all woo-woo right now, but it's true. Historically, they have that reputation, so I feel it. I do feel it when I'm out working bees. And I
A
think that's why we fall in love with them. What's that?
a sacredness.
Yeah, sacredness. That's the word. There's something sacred about them. Yes, yes.
Well, I think that is a perfect ending point for us today here for everybody. That is a lot to think about. There is a lot of information in there, and a very good reason why it might behoove some people to be a beekeeper. So, Peggy, thank you for joining us today. Could you let everybody know if they're interested in the Hive Hugger or would be interested in getting a hold of you to possibly help out with some of that research? What is the best way for people to find your products and to reach out to you there?
Hmm. Hivehugger.com. Hivehugger.com. So
Very
pretty
simple.
simple. Very simple. My email address is Peg. No, sorry. It's be the change, BEE, the change, MN for Minnesota at gmail.com. The name of the company is actually Be the Change, and the products are Hive Hugger. So you can actually do bethechange.com, and that'll bring you to the website too. But yes, my email is bethechangemn at gmail.com. So feel free to reach out that way too.
Excellent. Well, we greatly appreciate you joining us here today, Peggy. This has been a fantastic conversation. I know everybody out there will enjoy it, and we greatly appreciate it. And as a reminder to everybody else, you can join us over on Patreon if you want to hear the other half of this. We're going to go a little bit more in depth on some of the topics that were brought up today. And if not, that is totally fine as well, because we will talk to you next week. And I did not prepare you for this, Peggy. I am so sorry. I forgot to mention this in show prep. But coming up, you're going to have to come up with a bee-themed something to sign off with that is a parody that kind of goes along the lines of this. Be good, everybody.
And remember to be mindful, everybody.
Be sacred.
I love it.
This Hive Jive production was made possible by amazing patrons like you, and we appreciate your support. To all our Hive Jive junkies out there, you truly are the bee's knees.